Hello, friends, and welcome to the PrepWell podcast. I'm your host, Phil Black. And if you have an 8th, 9th, or 10th grader with big aspirations, like the Ivy League, or military service academies like West Point, ROTC, or athletic scholarships, boom, you've come to the right place. My specialty, my superpower, if you will, is preparing families for these competitive programs. I'll teach you what your child should do, when they should do it, and how you can help. So stick around and prepare to out-prepare. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the PrepWell podcast. In today's episode, I will go down a list in priority order of what I consider the most significant factors in college admissions. What are the needle movers? What are the pieces of the process that matter the most when it comes to decision time for colleges? And mind you, I'm not necessarily saying that I agree with these priorities, but this is where I believe we stand in today's day and age. As you will soon learn, this list will not come without debate and controversy, because these are just my opinions. These are not facts. It's not a secret list that I discovered on some website or somebody handed me out of some committee room. There is no official priority list, so to speak, that all colleges must follow. That's part of the problem. There certainly are patterns, and colleges do attempt to publish what they're looking for, but it's definitely not cut and dried. Colleges have different priorities. You might hear these referred to as institutional needs. Some schools care a lot about sports, or certain sports. Some care a lot about engineering, others history. Some put a big emphasis on building leaders. Others are more interested in scientific discovery and research. So by no means is this a perfect science, but I do think it will raise your awareness as to how the process works and in turn be helpful to you. I actually thought this would be easier to put together when I first started, but it turned out to be pretty difficult because a lot of these factors overlap and there are small degrees of difference, I think, as you'll see in a few minutes. As most students and families know, many colleges claim to use a holistic approach, which means theoretically that they're taking all of these things into account before making their final decisions, which I think is true. However, where do they put more emphasis? That is what I will opine on today. And instead of doing a reverse countdown and ending with the number one most important factor, I'm going to start with the number one most important factor and then go down the list. And the further down the list we go, the tougher it will be to separate how important these factors are compared to one another, because they all start to blend because they're all so important. And before we get started, I wanted to make note of the difference between two types of students. This differentiation can be seen in Jeff Salingo's book, Who Gets In and Why. He describes students as either drivers or passengers. As you might guess, the drivers are the students who are engaged in the process. They care about their future. They're willing to make decisions early in the game. They're motivated to make things happen. The passengers, on the other hand, are just cruising. They may think that college is a good idea. They assume that it's a standard path. It's their default mode, but they're not really into doing anything about it, at least not early enough for it to matter, which in my opinion, as you probably know, is freshman and sophomore year. As you might guess, PrepWell Academy typically attracts the driver types. So let's start at the top. What is the most important factor in college admissions? The factor that will have the biggest impact on whether you get accepted or not. And admittedly, as I go through this, the answers here will be skewed towards students who aspire to attend the more selective colleges. Let's call it the top 20 colleges or so. Again, no magic number here. Not that these are the best colleges or the best fit colleges for every student, but they happen to be very selective, and there are certain factors that come into play more so than for less selective colleges. And even if you don't necessarily aspire to go to a specifically selective school, I think these principles will help you nonetheless. So, drum roll, please. The most important factor is, number one, whether or not you are a recruited athlete. Because the simple fact is, if you are a recruited athlete, and by recruited athlete, I mean you are in conversations with a coach who has explicitly told you that you are his or her number one recruit or number two recruit, and you will have their support in admissions. If that's the case, then you will be evaluated with a different set of admission standards. I'm not saying that this is right or wrong or just or unjust. It's just the way it is. College athletics is very important to colleges. Getting the best talent is very important for many reasons, which I won't detail here, but I'm sure that you have a pretty good idea of what those reasons are. And keep in mind, this is true from the Division I level all the way down to the Division III level. This spans from elite scholarship athletes who get full rides all the way down to Division III athletes that get no athletic scholarship money at all. And of course, it also applies to the Ivy League. In the Ivy League, athletic recruiting is a huge factor because Ivy League sports are Division I, but they also do not offer athletic scholarships of any kind. So being a legitimately recruited athlete, highly recruited athlete, in my opinion, is the most direct way to get into a college, bar none. If a head coach puts you as their number one athletic recruit on his or her list from Division I all the way down to Division III, and you meet a relatively modest level of admissions requirements, you will be accepted, period. Now, I don't want to say that other factors that we'll discuss here in a second have no impact, but in most cases, the other factors are almost irrelevant. And yes, in the Ivy League, they will pay more attention to some of these other factors, but if you're their number one recruit, the standards can be very forgiving. Now, you may be thinking, thanks, Captain Obvious. We know that athletes get special treatment. That's why, as parents, we are psychotic. That's why we spend every dollar every weekend and seemingly every waking hour on our kids' sports so that they'll get this edge. So what's the new news here? And my answer would be, yes, you're right. This is a thing that many parents and students know about, that being a highly sought after recruit is a big deal. But I think when most families get on this crazy sports train, their mindset is more about athletic scholarship, more so than preferential admissions treatment. But in terms of numbers, the preferential admissions treatment, especially these days, should register as a bigger deal than any potential scholarship money for a number of reasons. One is because so few schools and sports actually offer full ride scholarships. In men's sports, it's only basketball and football that offer full rides. And the chances of your child getting a full ride scholarship in these two sports, if you're a male, is low. So you should be thinking about it more as it relates to admissions preference as opposed to money, if you have that luxury. So if I'm a parent, here's what I'm thinking. If my son or daughter, and that's a big if my son or daughter can get good enough in their sport to become a top recruit at a college that they really want to attend, especially if it's a highly selective college, then I'm going all in. Because becoming a recruited athlete will normally render almost everything else moot, whether it's SAT scores or GPA or summer internships. All of that stuff, maybe I'm being a little bit exaggerating a little bit here, all of that becomes on the margins irrelevant. And yes, this is true. This is a high stakes gamble because if you go all in, that normally means that your child doesn't have time to do anything else. They don't have time to be the student body president or the lead prosecutor in mock trial or the founder of the robotics club. So what happens if they just aren't good enough to get recruited, to get to that level when all is said and done? Then they end up as a better than average high school lacrosse player or softball player with not a lot else to fall back on. And this probably describes 97% of very good student athletes. And how will that path translate into college admissions? Not very well, especially at the highly selective schools. This can be very scary. So choose your path wisely. All right, let's move on to second most important factor in college admissions, SAT or ACT score. Okay, no, this sounds crazy since almost all colleges went test optional this year, meaning it was up to the student to submit or not submit an SAT or ACT score. And it appears that this policy will probably stick around for at least another year, if not longer. So if that's the case, and the tests are now optional, why would an SAT or ACT score possibly rank as the number 2 most important factor in college admissions? Shouldn't it be down on the list? Shouldn't it be less important now? Well, the answer is no, in my opinion. Now it's even more important than ever, because removing a critical data point makes it harder to differentiate students who don't submit their scores if you want to differentiate yourself. And that's the name of the game here. Would you rather be in the big pile of 70% of the students who choose not to submit an SAT or ACT score, or would you rather be on the small pile of students who did submit a strong SAT or ACT score? It's my contention that you want to be on the small pile. You almost always want to be on the small pile. So as you've heard me suggest several times, now is the time to double or triple down on your SAT or ACT preparation. Because if you can ring up a strong score, it will make the job of the admissions officer so much easier. They won't have to spend so much time and energy trying to determine how prepared you are for college-level work with a dwindling number of data points to work with. Because like it or not, your SAT score or ACT score immediately puts you in a certain league. Again, whether this is right or wrong is a different question. This is not a perfect predictor of how you'll perform in college, let alone life, but it is a number that admissions officers are very familiar with, and colleges are very familiar with. There's a lot of history here, and it helps them put you in a particular academic tier immediately. And if you can use this to your advantage, please do so. And before we leave standardized testing, now you've probably heard that SAT subject tests have now gone away, which makes me believe that the SAT is even more of a differentiator because there are now even fewer tests to represent your smarts. Let's move on to number 3, third most important factor in college admissions. National or international renown. Is your child world class or nationally ranked in something? It almost doesn't matter what it is. If your child is in the top 5 or so in the nation and the world, whether it's figure skating or speech and debate or a first-team All-American in a sport or a wildly successful entrepreneur in their own business, this will obviously set them apart and capture the attention of an admissions officer. Admitting these types of students also presents a potential marketing opportunity for colleges who admit high performers who may go on to become rich and famous. And colleges love it because it brings them a lot of attention and awareness to the school itself. The fourth most important factor in college admissions is a coherent brand. What do I mean by this? Well, what I mean is that when the admissions officer reads an application, do they get a clear sense of who the student is, what they've accomplished, and why they're pointing in a particular direction? Does their story hold together? Have the dots been connected? Do the letters of recommendation align with what the student says in their essays? Does the student's major choice match with their class choices during high school? Does the student's extracurricular activities paint a picture about what they value? Can the admissions officer quickly and easily summarize the person's profile because it's so well aligned, so clear, and so compelling? After all, this is what admissions officers have to do when they advocate for students in committee. They have to pitch the student like they would pitch a product. So the question is, have you equipped that admissions officer with the right mix of evidence and anecdotes and passion and direction so that they can make a clear case for you? The fifth most important factor in college admissions, demonstrated interest. I know this is a very loaded phrase these days. Demonstrated interest is the level of interest you have shown in any particular school. And that interest can manifest in many ways, some more impactful than others. You can follow them on Instagram, TikTok. You can sign up for their prospective newsletter. You can sign up for their virtual information sessions. And you should do all of those things. And I promote all of those things inside PrepWell Academy, starting in 9th grade. But they can only do so much. Tens of thousands of students could potentially do the same thing without a huge investment of time or energy. Taking a campus tour is good, shows a little bit more commitment if you can make it there, but it's also not the be-all and end-all. Applying early is a good way to demonstrate your interest, especially if it's early decision, which you probably know is binding. In my opinion, the most important pieces of demonstrating interest is developing a relationship with the college admissions officer who covers your high school. That would be one. And writing a very strong why us essay. Let's take those things one at a time. Most colleges assign college admissions officers to certain high schools. It's not a big secret. You can email the college or your guidance counselor and ask for the name of the admissions officer who covers your high school. It's your job to connect with them. But you need to come up with a good reason. You just don't want to email them and say, "Hi, here I am. Please keep me in mind when you're reading applications for XYZ high school." That's not going to fly. You need a reason. You need a good reason to connect with that admissions officer. Ideally, you have a specific question whose answer is not easily found on the website that the admissions rep can help you with. It may take some time and effort and research and creativity to come up with a good question, but it will be worth the investment. The goal here is to get your name in their head, and for a positive reason. That way, when the admissions person is reading through the applications and comes across yours, they're going to have a positive feeling going into it. They may even know quite a bit about you already before even cracking open your application. And with respect to the Why Us essay, let me describe what that is. Most colleges require a supplemental essay during the application process that asks you why you want to attend their school specifically. This is, in my opinion, the most important essay question and answer of all of them. This is the real estate that you have to prove to them that you know a lot about their school and that you are very sure, if not 100% sure, that if accepted, that you would attend. I can't tell you how many students blow off this essay, or they think it's easy, or they regurgitate exactly what the marketing brochure says online. That would be a disappointing mistake. One of the reasons that this is so important is because colleges want to know that you have a very good chance of attending if they accept you. This affects what they call their yield, meaning how many people actually attend from those who are accepted. Of course, they want a very high yield. And this data point affects their rankings, which they care a lot about. So if your profile and track record and behavior and essays don't leave the admissions officer from your high school with the impression that you are chomping at the bit to go to their school, you have failed to demonstrate interest. Colleges are reluctant to admit students who don't seem like they know much about the school, even if they're well above the academic averages. So don't make that mistake. Factor number 6 in the college admissions process: ability to pay. This has become more of an issue of late because of the financial beating many colleges have taken during the pandemic. Like most institutions, many colleges are hurting for money. And if they are not need blind, which means that a family's financial situation plays no role in the admissions decisions, then chances are they may give the nod to a family that's willing to pay in full versus a family that needs 90% need-based financial aid, for example. Now, this is definitely a generalization. Not all schools do such an analysis and make such decisions, but it's becoming more and more prevalent. The most well-endowed schools typically do not take a student's financial profile into effect. That's called need blind. You can look up online whether the schools that you're applying to are need blind or not. But many others do take this into consideration, especially schools that describe themselves as need aware. This means that when they make their final cuts, it would be in your best interests if you were not seeking financial aid. Yes, this does favor students who have financial means, but we also have to keep in mind that colleges need to stay solvent. They have to stay in business too. And this balance will become tougher and tougher to manage for the foreseeable future. The seventh most important factor in college admissions, GPA and the rigor of your classes. Now, you may be scratching your head here, because normally GPA and rigor of classes ranks way at the top of what colleges care about. After all, since you're in class every day, whether in person or remotely, and you get a wide range of assignments and a lot of exposure to your teacher, day in, day out, chances are that your grades in these classes will accurately reflect how you're performing in that class, as opposed to, say, one 3-hour SAT exam. So normally, keyword normally here, colleges use GPA as a very strong proxy for your academic prowess. And with respect to the rigor of your classes, colleges do want to know whether you're taking the standard curriculum or honors courses or AP courses or IB classes, college classes, because it makes a difference. Colleges want to know if you're challenging yourself. Both of these factors, in my opinion, have changed dramatically since COVID in terms of their emphasis. There is now such a wide disparity in education and grading systems and support and teaching that grades have almost become irrelevant. Because how are you supposed to compare a student from a private school who's getting in-person instruction for AP Bio 5 days a week with a student who's being taught AP Bio through Zoom 3 days a week, especially when they both get A's in the class? It just seems that almost every student I meet has over a 4.0 GPA. They're a dime a dozen these days. It's getting to the point that the GPA is becoming more and more obsolete and may stay that way for a few years until things really bounce back. Teachers are scared to mark students down. Other schools are inflating grades. Some schools are still pass-fail. Other schools allow students to take unlimited retests. It's a big mess. And the losers are the highly motivated students who are busting their butts to get good grades in the tough classes, but these efforts are not really being recognized like they used to be. Grades are looked at very skeptically. Factor number 8 in college admissions, extracurricular activities. We call these ECAs. And I'm even looking at this. ECAs are down at number 8. ECAs are very important. That's what I mean by there being so many factors that are right on top of each other in terms of their relative importance. ECAs allow students to show colleges what they care about. Do they care about theater or yearbook or student government or sports or medicine or research or working or volunteering? What activities did they do over the summer? How do they spend their precious time? Are these activities aligned with what they intend to study in college and their intended major? Are the ECAs known entities? And what I mean by that is, does the admissions reader know exactly what the activity entails? For example, being an Eagle Scout is a very strong ECA because it's well known, it's well established. Most admissions officers know that to become an Eagle Scout, it takes years and years of focused effort and leadership and a big impressive project at the end. They give such ECAs a lot of credit. On the other hand, if you're part of an unknown organization with no brand and little recognizability, even if you've done more than the equivalent of an Eagle Scout, you might not get the credit for it unless you do a really good job describing it, or you write one of your essays about it, or a teacher remarks about it. But if the description is left to a 150-character entry on your Common App activity list, you may have spent a ton of time and done great work, but may not get a lot of credit for it. So the bottom line is, choose your ECAs wisely. I spend a ton of time inside PrepWell Academy and working with my private clients, going over these issues and helping kids make smart decisions from early on about how to spend their time, including the summers, and how to get the most bang for their buck. The ninth most important factor in college admissions: letters of recommendation. With a constantly, seemingly, dwindling number of data points to grab hold to, test optional SATs, no SAT subject test, no more SAT essay section, I believe letters of recommendation are becoming more and more important, more and more relevant. Admissions officers want to learn about you from a third party, from an adult, who can talk about you in ways that don't show up in other places on the application. See, that's what's crazy. I can't believe that letters of recommendation is all the way down at number 9 on this list. These letters, especially at the more selective schools, have to be getting more attention. There's just not enough information out there otherwise to help them make the right decisions. And lastly, the 10th most important factor in college admissions is interviews, often called the alumni interview. I've done a few podcasts giving specific advice on how to nail this interview, so check those out if you're interested. Suffice it to say that in a tight race between two applicants, that a glowing review versus a meh review could be the difference between an admit and a deny. It's that simple. Some of these really close calls need a tiebreaker. And to the extent that you prepare for the interview and take it seriously and crush it, that may get you the nod. Remember, with fewer and fewer data points, these other screening tools are now becoming more and more important. I'm going to cut this off at 10, but there are plenty of other factors that we could talk about. This list could go to 20, 25, 30. Here are some of the honorable mention factors that didn't quite make the list. Number 1, leadership. 2, your demographic profile. 3, do you have any legacy status? 4, are you a geographic diversity applicant? And several others. I didn't want to go crazy. I wanted to leave it at 10. I hope that gave you some great perspective. And man, that was a lot to get through in and of itself. If you're still with me, do you feel like you have any more sympathy for the college admissions offices now? After all, they are charged with trying to sift through all of this. They're trying to go through thousands of highly qualified candidates with less and less information from home, with a lot of pressure to fill certain institutional needs and diversity needs and financial needs and the needs of the trustees and the coaches and the academic departments. It's a wonder that they make it through the season. And many of you students out there who are seniors, you think you have it rough waiting a few months to get the results back. Imagine the angst that these admissions officers are going through during these few months. I give them a lot of credit. So if you see admissions officers out there, give them a pat on the back. Tell them thank you for your time and thank you for your efforts. It's a pretty rough job. That's all I've got for you today, folks. Thank you for tuning in. If you know a parent with an 8th grader, 9th grader, 10th grader, 11th grader in high school that might find this helpful, please share the episode with them. You can do that by finding that small box with a tiny arrow pointing up. That's the share button. Click that button. Text your friends this episode. Write a little note to them recommending that they give it a listen. If you have questions, comments, or an idea for an upcoming episode, please reach out to me by email, DM me on Instagram. Check out our blog, Facebook, connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you. Until next week, goodbye, good luck, and never stop preparing. This podcast is brought to you by PrepWell Academy. PrepWell Academy is my one-of-a-kind online mentoring program that delivers to your 9th or 10th grader a short, highly relevant video from me every week, every Sunday, in fact, where I give them a heads up about what they should be thinking about to stay ahead of the game. To get these valuable lessons into your child's hands, please head over to PrepWellAcademy.com and enroll your child today.